So here's the engine compartment of my Mark III Supra. She's kind of ugly as stink, but at the same time, she goes like hell. So since I'm doing the head gaskets, the head gasket, because it's just one single piece, I'm going to have to remove the radiator, the battery, get the full top of the engine off. The turbocharger has to come off as well. The exhaust manifold, the intake manifold. It's going to be a big undertaking, so you have to drain your coolant and get all that stuff out of the way so that you can get to the head bolts, unbolt them, lift the valve train off, and then clean and hopefully not have to resurface the head. My head gasket is not blown, so I'm hoping that it's straight. I'll have my dad check it at his machine shop and make sure that it is, and if it isn't straight, I'll have to get it machined smooth again. So this is going to be a big undertaking. It's not going to be like a quick, simple thing, but I'm going to do the video in stages. So I'm going to remove the radiator, the battery, and a lot of the stuff on this side before I even start with the stuff on the other side. That when I have the intake off, I can address some of the leaks that I may or may not have underneath where my coolant bypass hoses are for the factory oil cooler, since I have an aftermarket front mount oil cooler on. So anyway, we'll get into the meat and potatoes. I got all the gaskets, hopefully, and this should go like a pain in the ass. Okay, here we are. I've got the coil packs undone and pulled out. I took a time to label my spark plug or coil pack wires. Clearly you can see the radiator is removed. I'm gonna center the timing belt so that it's at top dead center, yada yada. Gotta pull the valve covers off. The whole intake, it looks like a goddamn spider's nest. It's gonna be a pain. And I gotta take the turbo off. But here's where I'm at right now. Just kind of like a heads up. Pull your battery, pull your radiator. Get all the plumbing and everything out of the way here. Covers are all coming off. Valve covers off. You see the valves. Then you'll have to get the rest. I might leave the valve covers on for a little bit while I take all this apart, so not to drop anything down inside the motor. Yeah, I don't really know. It's going to be a fun thing to try and take apart. In order to get the harmonic balancer off, you're going to need a pulley puller. But before you even get to there, I use the jam method. So I don't want to drop my phone in the coolant. So you can see my belt comes up around the power steering pump, wraps down around the crank pulley, inside there, and it's just going across the bottom of the pulley, over the alternator, and back in. So you're using that piece of the belt to wedge into the pulley. I don't necessarily like this a whole lot because I'm afraid you could ruin a seal inside one of your pumps or whatever, but it seems to work pretty good. I did put a lot of force. You can see I've got a rather large breaker bar on there. It is free already because I did do it already, but let's see if I can bring that up so you can see. So you can see right there, you're going to do this with an old accessory belt or a spare one that you don't need anymore. So as you can see, it puts a kink in it. I mean, you could probably still use that. I wouldn't necessarily recommend it, but definitely if you have it in your toolbox for roadside trouble, that'd be good too. So that's where I'm going to go there. I'm going to use my pulley puller to pull that, get the front of the engine off, make sure everything's in time before I take it off. Not a big deal if it isn't, but I just like to mark everything. Just a quick little shot there of the crank puller. As you can see, the centerpiece pushes on the bolt, and then you got the two bolts that are threaded into the harmonic balancer, and that pulls it off the crankshaft. So after you take off the harmonic balancer, you remove the plate that covers, the last plate that covers the timing belt, the cam gears which are under there, and this here fancy party mask. That's also the cover that goes over the cam seals. I've got all the exhaust bolts sprayed with some deep creep. Exhaust still has to come off. I haven't started taking anything off besides one connector on the intake. Gonna go in for the night and tackle this tomorrow morning when I'm wide awake again. So the exhaust side's giving me a lot of hard time. Yours might be different depending on what header style you have and whatnot. So I've moved over to the intake side. I've started to undo systematically connections, took the throttle cable off, moved the assembly over to the side here, undoing the hoses from hose barbs, getting down into that spaghetti down in there as well, undoing all the connectors and everything all down the intake, and hopefully the intake comes off pretty simply. Then I'll be removing the valve covers and taking the valve train off. This is a huge job. I think I've said it 1,000 times. And I did choose to get ARP head studs. I will be ordering them today. No. Looks like I need to get a new brake cylinder too. Oh, great. Okay. So, to go about taking this off some more, you've got some bolts. There's one right there. There's 12mm bolts. I'm not sure how many there are yet. The 1, 2, 3. I believe you got to undo your oil dipstick and pull it out of the tube down there. There's also a mounting bolt down there for it as well. So systematically just take your nuts and bolts off, and then your intake should come off with a little brute force and ignorance, you could say. So hopefully, yeah, hopefully that'll work. So after I did a little research, the 2J is giving me a royal pain trying to get the last 2 bolts off the exhaust manifold. So I'm going to actually pull the cylinder heads off with the manifold attached and take the manifold off on the workbench so I can get the heads straightened out or whatever if need be. The intake, I didn't realize, is actually 2 pieces, because I'm like, how does somebody get their finger down in there to put the bolt back in? I can take them out, but I won't be able to get them back in. So it's actually 2 pieces. I've got it mostly unbolted. You do have to go and undo connectors, vacuum hoses. A lot of the things, if I'm a little worried that I can't find where they're going to go, I have taken and put tape on as to where, like, roughly they're going to go. But for the most part, this thing's going to road map itself out. So there's the bolts. You can see most of them exposed where I've taken the bolts or the nuts off. The nut on the flange there at the end. Okay. There's a brace down here that needs to come undone. I undid it lower than that because that one is like seized right in there. I think the dipstick is supposed to come out of its hole, but I'm going to leave it until I know for sure. But basically, this thing is almost ready to come out. I'm going to fiddle fart with that a bit, and we'll come back to it and see what, like, I'll show you what when it comes off. Not that. So you can kind of get the gist of it. I'm going to struggle with this some more, find out what's all connected, and then I'll show you a picture video of that. Now the intake is removed. You can see there are a lot of little hoses, and these two hook to the IAC valve, then hook back to the manifold from this side here. You got a coolant line that goes into the engine block. I'm not sure how far I'm going to go with taking these, so I might just undo all this and just lay it off to the side so I can do the heads, because I'm not doing much else there. And I don't want to get into spaghetti, like labeling all my injector wires and whatnot. We'll see though. It looks like I got a little issue here of some sludge going back into my engine. Maybe I will take that off and clean it. I don't exactly know at this moment in time. Oop. But there you go. So that's the intake removed, mostly, except for the, I don't know what you call those, velocity stacks or whatever. And I just got it sitting over here on my floor. So on to the next part, which is removing there's a bunch of bolts. You can see one there, one up top, 2, 3, 4, all the way down. So I'll get those all off. I broke my brake reservoir, great. And then while I have this off, because I've bypassed my OEM oil cooler, I will tighten up those hose clamps and hoses and hope for a forever fit. So I've gone and undid connectors for whatever those are, not sure. Fuel injectors, I've numbered every one as I've undid them. There's a plastic clip down there that holds the wiring loom for the injectors and a bunch of other stuff on it. That has to be undone. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, I think 7 bolts need to come undone, and then this should come right out. The other thing I did was I undid a bolt here for the fuel rail, but I don't think I needed to. It's either you're gonna undo that banjo fitting at the end or the one down yonder. As soon as I start to pull this out, I'll brace it and figure out what the hell's going to come off next. Like I said before, this is a pretty big undertaking. Yeah, I don't know. And like, my fucking pipes are just gross. I don't know why this extra oil is going in here, or if that was before. That also could have been because I had a bad seals leak in my turbo once. So anyway, take this apart, see where we get. That might work there. Undo this one. Yeah, that'll probably work. Undo this, put a bolt in it so it doesn't leak fuel everywhere. As you can see, I've got everything pretty well undone. The only thing is, I'm going to undo that banjo fitting and hopefully pull this metal fuel line down through this space in the whatever you call that, a fuel injector rail holder thingy. We'll call it that for now. And that piece of the intake should come out. Pop the tops off, pull the cams and all the bearing caps and everything out, and on to the next. I'm having a hard time getting the fuel rail unhooked, so I'm going to leave the intake stack laying like that for now while I take the camshafts out. Now, with the camshafts, you're going to want to do them in sequence. I believe it's a second bearing cap back, 1, 2, then the 5th one back, 3, 4, and I'll post the sequence on the screen in like the next frame. So after that, you'll pull the camshafts out and your head bolts will be exposed. And at that point, you will get the special Toyota tool or special 12-point socket, whatever one it is. I'm not sure. I've seen down in there, there's no Arp studs in this yet. I did order a set, so I will be able to drive it happy and not worry about detonation or anything weird. But that's where I'm at next. Camshafts and all that stuff, they'll all be organized and stabbed into a piece of cardboard off to the side. And yeah, I'll just keep systematically taking it apart until I get to the bottom. At this point, after doing the loosening sequence, you'll notice the camshaft will kind of pop up as you're doing the sequence and pulling the bearing caps off. I loosened them all in sequence, and then I went through after and took them all out. So now time for the camshafts to come out, which will expose the head bolts. Earlier I said that I'm going to take the exhaust off with the whole head. If you can get your exhaust manifold off, take it off in the beginning, because this is going to be a pain to lift out the whole cylinder head plus the camshaft, or plus the exhaust manifold. So another thing to note, when removing your bearing caps, whatever, put them in the intake exhaust side in order of the cylinders as you've taken them off. Now, I wouldn't worry too much, or have a look at least. Each one of them has, I don't know if it'll get it, but no. Okay, each one has an arrow on it. There you go, you can kind of see it there. That faces the front of the vehicle. So I'm going to go pull these cabs off, and then I got to get the special tool to get the cylinder head bolts off. And I'm pretty sure there's a select pattern that you're supposed to use for that as well. To get the it's not going to focus because I got a dirty lens probably, but to get that bolt off right there, it's in, this is a JDM 2J, and this is an M12. It's a, I believe it's called a hexagonal wrench. Basically, it's a 12-point Allen key. I'm not sure if this part number will help you at all, but it's Performance Tool W1395, and the M12 is, I believe it fits a 1/2-inch socket, and then I'll use it to take the head bolts out in sequence, and I believe it goes 1, 2, 3, 4, and then I'll post a photo of the sequence on the next frame probably, so that you can see exactly what it is. So I'm going to go ahead and pull those head bolts out, and then presumably the exhaust manifold and the cylinder head should just lift right out. I might have to undo that coolant hose in the very back there as well, I think. So there's my head bolts and washers all removed. It looks like they may have used Felpro or even OEM Toyota when they did my head gasket, possibly. When I got this engine put in, I didn't do the swap. I didn't know enough at the time to do the swap. When I got it put in, I asked them to put a new head gasket, and they supposedly did. So I used a pick tool to fish the washers out of the spot where the washer sits down in there. So the bolts washers are all out. I do have the spark plugs in for now. I don't know why. Whatever. I'm going to pull this out. I got to find a clean spot to set my cylinder head down though. Okay, you might not get to see me lift it away. I'm going to give my dad a call and have him come and help me lift the block on the cylinder head. If I didn't have my turbo manifold, or my exhaust manifold hooked to it, I'd probably be able to lift it out of there. Right, onto the reassembly process here. So I've got my clutch all installed and everything, and now I am doing the cylinder head. So I've cleaned the surface using a roll-lock disc, which is a little gritty finger disc that takes away the extra rubber. It is smooth. Anything that you see on there is actually just staining. I didn't want to dig it all out and cause imperfections in the head. The head is straight, so is the deck is straight, so is the cylinder head over there. So I'm installing Arp Studs. The instructions come with them on the box, or in the box, whatever. Essentially, you're going to put these into the block and then tighten them down. If you're going to keep them permanently, you can use permanent thread locker. They recommend that if that's what you're going to do, but if you're going to reuse these in the future or something else, don't use the thread lock. That's just that's up to you what you do. I'm not using the thread lock. So you're gonna put all these in, put the gasket on, put the cylinder head on, make sure this area is completely clean. Use brake parts cleaner or some solvent to get any grease or residue off of the cylinder head mounting surface, and then torque these down to the box says 80 foot-pounds, and that's in the sequence that Toyota wants you to do them, but your end result is 80 foot-pounds. They're not torque to yield, you just torque these ones. Aside from that, yeah, I'm not really sure. I guess I'll add the next part after, but so I'm gonna install these, put the gasket on, put the cylinder head on, torque this all down, and then go back to assembling the block here and whatever. I was gonna super clean everything, but I don't know if I got it in me now. I'm been kind of beat up over this whole build, so there you are. So in the Mark III Supra, you have a clearance issue with the rear Arp studs. So what I'm going to end up doing is, and to make the head easier to place onto the top of the engine, is I'll put in the head studs after I get the holes lined up and everything. Then I'll stud them. Be careful not to drop any studs down the oil drain back passages or whatever those big holes are. You can fish it out with a magnet, but it's not easy. So I'm gonna go and set the head on this nice gasket. Surface has been cleaned, cylinder head cleaned, made sure it's decked or like it's nice and smooth and not warped at all. The head gasket did not blow. I'm just changing it as a routine maintenance, as I noticed a little seepage down the cast iron engine block. So I'm gonna go ahead and put this on, put the studs in, and then do the torque based on Toyota. And then ARP has, I believe, I gotta check in the box, but I think it's torqued to 100 foot-pounds after you do the sequence to 26 or 27 foot-pounds. So by now you've got your rocker covers or your valve covers on, your spark plug or your coil unplug, oh my god, help me. Coil unplug. I've already put up the torque sequence for these, or a link to it in the description below. Basically now it's just a systematic, like, so as you can see, some of the wiring there has electrical or masking tape on it so that I know where I have to plug everything back in. So I'm going to spray the engine bay down with a little degreaser, and I think I'm going to hit it with the pressure washer a little bit because it's kind of gunky down in there where it's been leaking for a while. Same with on this side. And systematically put things back together. I'll turn the camera on if I see or deem anything necessary, but if you've made it this far, there's a good chance that you can make it the rest of the way without needing my video for any of that. So if there's something you don't know how it came off, just rewind or scroll back and figure out, like, see where I took it off or whatever's there. I know I'm making no sense at all right now, but basically with some of my other videos, the way you put it back together is opposite the way you take it apart, and oftentimes you get a big mess of tools like right there and containers all over the place, and I just try to keep the parts from the areas that they came off of together. So I'm just going to hammer away at this for a while, and hopefully I'll have this all together and get the old 2J running real soon. So like I said in the previous video, you're just going to systematically put everything back together opposite that you took them apart. One thing to note, the IAC valve, I kind of got a little confused as to what was running through the two hose barbs on it, and they are coolant. So I've got that all hooked up. My 2J is a single turbo setup, so a lot of the vacuum stuff that has to do with the twin turbos is looped or capped or whatever. Some of that I did, some of that somebody else did when they did my single turbo swap. So I'm hitting the final stages of the intake side, where I just got to put in the bolts for the intake, the brackets, mount the engine oil dipstick and the diagnostic port, and then I will be coming over and putting on the exhaust. Now I do have some new studs that are a little short. I'm not sure what I'm going to do there, whether I'm going to replace them or not. So I'll turn the camera back on when I'm in more trouble or whatever.